The cracks in Keir Starmer's carefully crafted image are widening, and this time, there's nowhere to hide. For months, he has repeated the same tired mantra: Liz Truss crashed the economy, Liz Truss is to blame, Liz Truss is the reason for Britain's financial woes. It's been his shield, his excuse, his go-to response for every economic failure under his leadership. But now, Truss has had enough. And she's not just fighting back with words, she's coming at him with the full weight of the law. A legal cease and desist letter has landed on Starmer's desk, and it carries the force of a political earthquake. Truss is demanding an immediate end to his repeated accusations, labeling them false, defamatory, and damaging to her reputation. And she's absolutely right. The idea that 49 days of her premiership single-handedly destroyed the British economy is not just absurd, it's a blatant distortion of reality. But reality has never been Starmer's strong suit. What's astonishing is his reaction. Rather than countering with facts, evidence, or even an attempt at justification, his spokesman simply doubled down, stating that Starmer absolutely stands by his language. No legal argument. No economic explanation. Just sheer, desperate defiance. And that, right there, is the problem. This isn't about economic truth, it's about political convenience. But here's the thing, this lawsuit has exposed him. Watch closely and you'll see it in his face, his body language, his nervous deflections. At Prime Minister's questions, the moment the lawsuit was mentioned, his entire demeanor shifted. The tension in his posture, the abrupt shift in topic, the visible discomfort. This is a man who knows he's been caught out. At a recent press conference, a journalist dared to bring up Truss's legal challenge. Starmer shut it down immediately. No response, no justification, just a hasty retreat. Why the fear? Why the silence? Because this lawsuit doesn't just challenge his economic narrative, it undermines his entire credibility. He has spent so long pinning Britain's financial difficulties on one short-lived administration that he never expected to be forced to legally prove his claims. And now, backed into a corner, he has nothing. But this scandal runs even deeper. Because while Starmer has spent months portraying himself as the serious, responsible leader cleaning up after Truss's supposed economic disaster, he has quietly been enjoying the perks of power, luxury gifts, designer clothes, and lavish experiences. Yes, the man who lectures struggling families about tough economic choices has been accepting over £170,000 worth of freebies from wealthy donors. Does that sound like a leader who shares your struggles? Designer suits, expensive glasses, exclusive Arsenal tickets, all gifted by figures like Wad Ali, a media entrepreneur with deep labor ties. And Starmer didn't just accept them, he failed to declare them on time, breaching parliamentary rules. Was this incompetence, or a deliberate attempt to keep his luxuries hidden from public scrutiny? Neither answer is reassuring. But it gets worse. When confronted, his defense was almost laughable, that taxpayers shouldn't have to pay for politicians' clothes. No, Keir, that's not the issue. The issue is that while you demand sacrifices from the public, you're living a lifestyle that most Britons can't even dream of. While families are choosing between heating and eating, Starmer is attending VIP football matches. While pensioners struggle with slashed winter fuel payments, he's draped in designer labels paid for by others. And it's not just him. His chief of staff, Sue Gray, earns £170,000 a year, more than the Prime Minister himself. How can a government that preaches economic hardship justify that kind of salary? Starmer insists that there is no alternative to his economic measures. No alternative except, apparently, lining his own pockets and those of his inner circle. This is the height of political hypocrisy. And yet, astonishingly, it isn't even his worst betrayal. Because while he talks about strengthening Britain, he is quietly negotiating away British sovereignty. Yes, while you were being told that Britain cannot afford to fund public services, Starmer's government was secretly preparing to hand over the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, a move that will cost British taxpayers a staggering £8.9 billion over the next 99 years. Just let that sink in. £8.9 billion to rent back our own military base in Diego Garcia, a strategically crucial site for Western defense. We currently own it outright, but soon, we'll be paying billions for the privilege of using what was already ours. And it gets even darker. This entire deal is legally dubious. Under British constitutional law, the ceding of sovereign territory requires parliamentary approval. But Starmer's government didn't seek it. Instead, they've tried to push this through quietly, behind closed doors, hoping no one would notice. Well, people are noticing. A High Court challenge is already in motion, led by prominent figures who argue that this deal is unconstitutional. Former Attorney General Michael Ellis has branded it outlandish and irrational, while top legal minds are questioning whether the government even has the authority to make this decision without parliamentary consent. So what does Starmer do? He stonewalls journalists. He dodges questions. His team pressures media outlets to downplay the story. If this deal is so justifiable, why the secrecy? Why the fear of scrutiny? The answer is simple. Because this isn't about Britain's best interests. It's about a government making deals without public consent, without transparency, and without regard for the long-term consequences. And while all of this unfolds, Britain is crumbling under Starmer's leadership. The NHS waiting list has hit a record-breaking 7 million people. That's 7 million patients trapped in limbo, waiting for life-saving treatment while Starmer focuses on defending himself in court. Prisons are at 95% capacity. What's the solution? Instead of fixing the system, Starmer's government is releasing criminals early. Yes, the same man who built his career on being tough on crime is now quietly opening prison doors because his government cannot manage the justice system properly. And then there's his disastrous foreign policy. Starmer's recent trip to Washington was nothing short of a humiliation. He arrived, hat in hand, begging for American support, only to be openly dismissed by Trump's administration. While he rambled about international security, American officials made it painfully clear the UK's military has been so weakened that it couldn't sustain a fight against Russia for more than 2 months. Our once great military is now a hollowed-out shell, and Starmer's foreign policy strategy? Begging the US to fix it for him. This is a pattern. Everywhere you look, there's failure. Legal battles over false claims. Austerity for the public while he enjoys luxury perks. Secret deals that betray British sovereignty. A collapsing NHS. An overwhelmed justice system. A humiliated Prime Minister on the global stage. The question isn't if Starmer's government will collapse, it's how much damage he will do before it does. Keir Starmer preaches sacrifice, but when it comes to his own lifestyle, the rules don't seem to apply. While millions of Britons are told to tighten their belts, while families are forced to make impossible choices between heating and eating, Starmer is draped in designer suits, sporting luxury eyewear, and enjoying VIP treatment at football matches, all funded by wealthy donors. This isn't just hypocrisy, it's a slap in the face to every hard-working Brit who has been told that economic hardship is simply unavoidable. Let's be absolutely clear, Starmer has accepted over £100,000 in luxury gifts, a staggering amount that most households in this country won't earn in years, let alone spend on indulgences. The benefactors behind these lavish donations? Figures like Wad Ali, a media entrepreneur and Labour donor with deep pockets and clear influence. And yet, while Starmer was busy enjoying the spoils of power, he failed to declare these gifts on time, breaking parliamentary rules. Was it incompetence or a deliberate attempt to hide the truth? Either way, it's unacceptable. And when he was confronted, his response was nothing short of insulting. His defense: taxpayers shouldn't have to pay for politicians' clothes. Nobody suggested they should, Keir. The issue isn't who funds your wardrobe. The issue is that you expect ordinary Britons to endure financial pain while you waltz around in £1,000 suits gifted by the elite. Let's put this into perspective. The average UK household earns less in a year than the value of Starmer's freebies. Meanwhile, people across the country are making sacrifices he will never have to experience. Pensioners are seeing their winter fuel payments slashed, but Starmer never has to worry about whether he can afford to keep the heating on. Struggling families are watching their disposable income disappear under rising taxes, but Starmer is getting top-tier football tickets for free. While small businesses are collapsing under the weight of energy costs and high interest rates, Starmer is comfortably shielded from financial stress, because someone else is always footing the bill. And it's not just him. His Chief of Staff, Sue Gray, is raking in £170,000 a year, more than the Prime Minister himself. The Labour government tells you that there is no alternative to harsh economic measures, Yet somehow there's always enough money for those at the top. Starmer's government has mastered the art of making others pay the price while they continue to enjoy the privileges of power. But this goes beyond personal greed. It's about trust. How can a man who preaches about doing the right thing justify living off the generosity of the wealthy while millions suffer? How can he demand sacrifices from the people while refusing to make any himself? And most importantly, what do these donors get in return? Because let's not pretend that six-figure luxury perks come without expectations. The deeper you look, the clearer it becomes. This isn't a leader who understands the struggles of ordinary Britons. This is a man completely detached from reality, a career politician who has spent his life in legal chambers and political circles, never once having to deal with the financial burdens that plague millions. That's why he has no problem telling you to endure short-term pain for the greater good. Because for him, the pain is never personal. And while Starmer is busy enjoying his elite lifestyle, his government is making decisions that will impact this country for generations. Let's talk about something that most of the mainstream media isn't covering. His government is secretly negotiating away British territory. Yes, while the public is distracted by economic struggles, Keir Starmer is in the process of surrendering the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, a move that will cost British taxpayers £8.9 billion over the next 99 years. Let that sink in. £8.9 billion to lease back our own military base in Diego Garcia, a location of critical strategic importance. We own this territory, but soon, we will be paying billions just to use what was already ours. This isn't just mismanagement, this is a direct attack on British sovereignty, and it's happening without parliamentary approval. It is, quite simply, illegal. Ceding British territory requires explicit approval from Parliament, yet Starmer's government is trying to push this deal through in secret. There's already a legal challenge in motion, led by senior Conservative figures who argue that this agreement is a betrayal of constitutional law. Former Attorney General Michael Ellis has called the move outlandish and irrational, and legal experts are warning that it could set a dangerous precedent for how the UK handles its territories in the future. And yet, how has Starmer responded? By silencing the discussion. Journalists who ask too many questions find themselves stonewalled. Some news outlets have reported pressure from Downing Street to downplay the story. If this deal is justifiable, why the secrecy? If it's the right thing to do, why are they so desperate to prevent scrutiny? But here's the worst part. While Starmer is fighting to hold onto his image, Britain is falling apart under his leadership. The NHS crisis is spiraling out of control. More than 7 million people are now stuck on waiting lists, an all-time high. That's 7 million individuals waiting for life-saving treatment, surgeries, and care that should have been provided months ago. And yet, what is Starmer focused on? Legal battles and PR damage control. Meanwhile, the prison system is in absolute chaos. The UK's jails are now at 95% capacity, meaning Starmer's government is being forced to release criminals early just to make space. This is the same man who built his career on being tough on crime, the same politician who claimed he was committed to law and order. And now, under his leadership, offenders are being quietly let back onto the streets because his government cannot handle the justice system. And then there's foreign policy, or, more accurately, Starmer's humiliating failure on the world stage. His recent visit to Washington was a disaster. He arrived, begging for American support, only to be dismissed outright. While he desperately tried to push his globalist agenda, US officials made it clear that Britain's military is no longer a serious force. And they're not wrong. The UK's military has been so hollowed out that we could only sustain combat against Russia for 2 months. That's how far we've fallen. And yet, Starmer's solution wasn't to strengthen our armed forces, it was to plead for handouts from an administration that isn't listening. The signs of collapse are everywhere. A government that demands sacrifices from the people while enriching itself. A Prime Minister who sells off British assets in secret deals while claiming to stand for the nation's interests. A failing NHS, an overwhelmed justice system, a leader too busy fighting lawsuits to govern effectively. And the public is waking up. Starmer's approval ratings are sinking, and for good reason. People can see the disconnect between his words and his actions. They know when they're being lied to. This is more than just poor governance. This is a betrayal of everything Britain stands for. The question isn't if Starmer's government will crumble, it's how much damage he will do before it does. Keir Starmer's leadership is collapsing, and the signs are everywhere. His credibility is in tatters, his authority is being openly challenged, and his government is making decisions that threaten the very foundation of British sovereignty. This is not just about political missteps or broken promises. This is about a Prime Minister who is actively weakening Britain, both at home and on the world stage. While Starmer preaches responsibility and stability, behind closed doors, he is negotiating the surrender of British territory. That's right, his government is preparing to hand over the Chagos Islands to Mauritius, a move that will cost British taxpayers an eye-watering £8.9 billion over the next 99 years. This is money Britain does not need to be spending, especially when it means paying to lease back our own strategic military base in Diego Garcia, a base that has been a crucial asset for both British and American defense operations in the Indo-Pacific. Why would a British Prime Minister, supposedly committed to national security, voluntarily weaken the UK's strategic position? And why is this being done in secret, without proper parliamentary scrutiny? Under British constitutional law, the ceding of sovereign territory requires parliamentary approval. Starmer's government, however, has bypassed this entirely, attempting to push the deal through quietly, with minimal public discussion. Now, let's be clear, this isn't some minor bureaucratic decision. This is Britain giving away a vital piece of military and geopolitical influence, with no justification beyond political expediency. The Chagos Islands are not just some distant atoll in the Indian Ocean. They represent a crucial listening post for Western intelligence, a key military foothold in an increasingly volatile region. So why the secrecy? Why the rush to hand over British territory without proper debate? Because this is about optics, not national interest. Starmer is desperate to present himself as an internationally respected leader, a diplomat capable of forging alliances. But in his rush to be seen as a global statesman, he is giving away Britain's leverage, one decision at a time. And this is part of a wider pattern, one of weak leadership, poor judgment, and a complete lack of accountability. While Starmer is negotiating away Britain's sovereignty, millions of Britons are suffering under a crumbling NHS, where over 7 million patients are now stuck in endless waiting lists, unable to access the care they desperately need. This isn't just a statistic, it's a national emergency. People are dying while they wait for treatment, parents are watching their children suffer through illnesses that should be easily treated, and the elderly are being abandoned by a system that can no longer support them. And what is Starmer doing? Focusing on lawsuits, political optics, and diplomatic photo ops, rather than tackling the crisis that is affecting millions of lives. And it doesn't stop there. Britain's prisons are now at 95% capacity, a disaster that any competent government would have seen coming years in advance. But instead of expanding capacity, instead of making the tough but necessary choices to fix the problem, Starmer's government has chosen the easy way out, early release for criminals. Yes, the same man who built his career on being tough on crime is now quietly releasing offenders back onto the streets. This isn't an accident. This is a direct result of failure to manage resources, failure to plan, failure to govern. And yet, while the country is in crisis, where do we find Keir Starmer? Not in Downing Street, not addressing the needs of his own people, but in Washington, desperately begging for American support. And what did he get for it? Humiliation. The administration of Donald Trump openly dismissed his pleas, making it abundantly clear that the United States will not continue funding Europe's defense while Britain allows its own military to collapse. Think about that for a moment. Britain, once a global military power, once a nation that commanded respect on the world stage, now reduced to groveling for scraps, only to be brushed aside. This is what Starmer has done. His leadership is a catastrophe. His government is crumbling under the weight of its own failures. The lawsuit from Liz Truss has shattered his credibility, exposing the fraudulent economic narrative he has been selling to the public. His lavish lifestyle, funded by wealthy donors, has alienated working-class voters who once saw him as an alternative to Tory elitism. And now, his complete failure to protect Britain's interests abroad has left the country weaker, poorer, and more vulnerable than ever before. The British people are waking up. The polls are shifting. Even Labour loyalists are beginning to question whether Starmer is truly fit to lead. The question is not if his government will collapse, it is how much more damage he will inflict before it does.